Welcome back to the Manifest Your Success podcast, where we break down what it means to be successful, share the accomplishments, failures, and perspectives of individuals on entrepreneurship, business, and self-improvement.
Welcome to episode 52 of the Manifest Your Success podcast. It has officially been a full year since we released our first episode, and we could not be happier. We are honored to be joined for our one-year episode by Brian Feroldi. Brian has grown a massive following across Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn, where he shares lessons and graphics about money, business, and self-improvement. He also runs a newsletter with over 50,000 readers and is the author of the recently published book, Why Did the Stock Market Go Up? It's a pleasure to have you, Brian. Welcome to the show.
Thank you guys for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Yes. So you're someone that really, you have a lot of information out there. And for anyone that doesn't know you personally, I think literally if you just Google like Brian Feroldi, you will just see a massive amount of investment advice. And to kind of give just a little background, because you've said this a lot, so to save you the time, you basically like went through this time where you were stacking shelves and you decided to learn decided to listen to podcasts because you were kind of working and you were like, okay, what do I do with my time? And you were like, wow, I can really listen to podcasts and actually learn from while I'm working and get better on and outside of your job. So I'm curious, like just in general, are there any other ways that you think that you've like maximized like the time and like the utility of your time, whether it be you're working at a job or you're doing something else in your life? I know it's kind of putting you on the spot, but is there any other like similar tips that you've used or practices just like listening to podcasts while working or listening to podcasts while in the car? Is there anything else that you would say someone could do to really get the most out of their time?
Yeah. I'm a big believer in what you do with your free time is actually a big really defines who you are. Plenty of people just in their free time naturally gravitate towards mindless TV or watching, stupid YouTube videos or just like things that like don't better themselves at all. There's nothing wrong with that, especially if you work hard, you just want to like unwind. I have always been the type of person that just has like an unquenchable thirst for whatever I'm interested in at that time. And just for whatever reason, for the last 20 years, I've been incredibly interested in everything related to money, personal finance, and investing. And I have found that using the kind of quiet times in my life, and if I overlay them with a podcast just going on in the background, you just naturally absorb a ton of information and you can really turbocharge your learning. So I've just been interested in that forever. To your point, I had a job. I was fortunate enough in 2006 to get to land a sales job, and that job essentially had me in my car for 30 to 35 hours per week driving around. And I know people that entire time they were listening to like Howard Stern. They were like literally listening to like 30 hours of Howard Stern per week. And I was like, oh my God, how could your brain not go to like mush? Nothing against that show. I'm sure it's very entertaining. But I used every bit of that time to listen to audiobooks, to listen to earnings calls, to listen to podcasts about money. And I essentially gave myself an MBA education in investing in business just as a side benefit of having my job. So I'm just a huge fan of finding time in your life and using that time to really educate yourself. And there's an endless number of ways that you can do so.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think podcast is like the most overlooked way to do that too, because you can literally like it's literally just something that you can plug in, you put in earbuds, and then like you just play it, and you literally know it doesn't matter what you're doing, whether you're working out, driving in a car, or doing stacking shelves and whatnot when you first started. Did you have any like significant podcasts that you you felt the most were like influential on your life and kind of like, oh wow, I really like listening to this guy, I'm gonna keep doing it, or this girl? And what were those podcasts?
So I first started listening to podcasts back in like 2008 when they were like the industry was in its infancy. And back then, the number of choices that you had was extraordinarily limited. I remember the Motley Fool launched a podcast called Motley Fool Money, which is still going to this day. And it was like a once a week show for like 40 minutes. And I listened to that like every single time that it came out. Another podcast at the time that is still going to the day is called is Brian Preston's show, The Money Guy. That has literally been on on the air for like 13 or 14 years, and that is a show that I still listen to this day. More recently, within the last 3 years, there's been an explosion of high quality podcasts out there that relate to anything and everything that you can think of related to money. Just before I got on with the show with you guys today, I was listening to All the Hacks podcast with Chris Hutchins. Don't know if you've ever heard that before. That's a fantastic podcast. It goes into all areas of hacks in your life to become more efficient. So I love podcasting, the entire format.
Yeah, I'm actually curious, since you kind of found podcasts so early, maybe what made you not decide to go the road of creating your own podcast, or maybe joining the Motley Fool podcast, and instead you kind of went and started posting on Twitter and started writing for the Motley Fool. How did that happen?
Sure. So the Motley Fool, I became a member of the Motley Fool in like 2009. I was a reader for many years before that, consuming a lot of the free articles. And again, podcasts really didn't exist as a time as a format for them. But once you become a paying member to the Motley Fool, which I think I did in 2009, 2010, right around there. One wonderful thing about the Motley Fool is they have a thriving community that is like behind the paywall, where people openly share, hundreds of thousands of people openly share investing data, resources, lessons, and more with each other. And it was really through interacting on those discussion boards, which was all done just through like old school typing, because they were literally set up in like the late 1990s. That's where I got a fantastic education about all facets related to business analysis, financial statements, risk, you name it. You can learn about it on there. And that would soak up a huge amount of my free time. Basically, when I got home from work, my wife would be watching a TV show, and I'd have my laptop and I would be kind of like chatting with people through there. I never had ambitions to become a content creator. Like, that was never part of my long-term plan. But I did establish a name for myself on these discussion boards simply because I've been posting to them behind the scenes for years. But again, I never thought, boy, I should become a content creator. So I didn't ever think I should start a podcast. All this content creation stuff almost happened by accident over the last couple of years, and it just kept going.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think sometimes we just stumble upon things in our life, and when they're working, you just keep doing them. And right now, I think you have like over 400,000 followers on Twitter, which is an insane following. And I think one of your most like notable things are your graphics. And I'm not sure, when did you kind of start moving into graphics, or did you? I know you've talked about it before on other podcasts where you first started with articles, and then you worked in, and you were like, okay, these articles really, you're not really providing much value to these people. So what was your technique for like, okay, transitioning from these articles? And then what did you realize worked for people to follow you and click on your profile?
Sure. So I signed up for Twitter in like 2009, like on a whim, right? And that was, I never used it. I never opened the app. I never touched it. When I first discovered Twitter, I was like, this is stupid. Like, this is like the dumbest thing ever. So I just ignored it for a period of years. In 2015, I became a writer for the Motley Fool, which was very much my dream job. So I started writing articles for Fool.com, and that became the way that I made my full-time living. Now, when you're a writer, a big part of the job is creating clickable headlines and subtitles and getting attention for your articles. That's a big part of the incentive structure. So like many writers at the time, one idea was, well, write an article and then share it on social media. So I just used my Twitter profile to essentially dump links, nonstop links to my articles as a way to just get free extra eyeballs on it. That was my logic at the time, which is, of course, akin to taking your followers and like basically punching them in the face nonstop with things like, hey, click this, hey, click this, hey, click this, which is the exact wrong way to build a following. I didn't know that at the time. In about 2018/2019, I noticed that people in the finance space that I super respected, like Morgan Housel, like Patrick O'Shaughnessy, were actually posting regular things to Twitter and actually using Twitter as it was like intended to be used, and they were growing their followings pretty hugely. And I was like, well, if these people are actually looking at Twitter and using it differently, perhaps I'm missing something about it. So that started to slowly change my mindset on Twitter from constantly dumping articles to start actually using the platform as it was intended. Over time, Twitter became a bigger and bigger part of my daily process, and it's since become an invaluable tool that I have. My favorite thing about Twitter is that it lets you connect with and talk to people that you would have no connection to in any way prior to that. Like the FinTwit community is pretty robust and pretty thriving, and in general, people there's plenty of trolls. Don't get me wrong, but in general, people there are there to help and connect and talk to each other, especially if you cultivate your following a certain way. And then over time, after just a whole bunch of trial and error, you've kind of learned what the platform wants. You learn what does better than other platforms. And it was just a slow evolution of figuring out what you post that can have the biggest impact. And I've just kind of been on that snowball for a couple of years.
Yeah, I think it's funny that you mentioned how you downloaded Twitter, and for the longest time you didn't really use it. I kind of went through that same thing where I had it just because everyone in high school kind of had it, and they would post or like retweet sports things or stuff like that, and I just never really went on it. And then I started getting into like investing. I started getting into penny stocks because a lot of people at my high school were like downloading Robinhood, and my dad was like, he kind of forced me to get on Twitter, and he made me follow some accounts, and you were one of them, like you and Morgan Housel and Ian Castle, and then I finally started using it, and I was like, okay, wow, there's actually ways where you can get out useful information from Twitter, and instead of looking at cat videos and things like that all day. I'm curious, like as you started to post things and grow your following, was there a point where you kind of decided, okay, I have like a large following, I have a lot of value I'm providing, I want to bring on more people to my team? And what were maybe some traits or qualities you looked for in people you brought on, maybe other than their names also being Brian and being bald?
No, that's it. Number one criteria, you didn't got to be Brian. Number two, you got to have hair problems, and then you're in. So again, everything that I've done over the last couple of years was not really like thought out ahead of time. It's all kind of been accidentally discovered. So I started taking Twitter seriously at the end of 2019 / into early 2020. And obviously when COVID hit and the world got flipped upside down, I started taking Twitter much more seriously because a ton of people were flocking to it. The platform was growing and plus you couldn't really leave your house or do anything. So not only was my following growing much faster, but I also had free time on my hands. I had no grand master plan other than I'm enjoying this. I like connecting with people. This is fun. However, in August of 2020, I started to write a book, and a big part of writing a book is being able to eventually market the book and being able to actually have people that are interested in buying the book from you. That's like, you need to put just as much work into the marketing effort as you do into the actual writing of the book. And since I already had a little bit of momentum on Twitter at the time, that was one reason why I kept going as intensely as I had, because I wanted to market people that know me that would be willing to buy my book, which when it finally came out, which took me about 18 months from when I started to when it was actually available on bookshelves. So that was a big part of the motivation to continue growing. Along the way, as I was continuing to growing, I learned that there were all these other ways that if you had a following or an attention or an audience of any size, that you could actually make money from them and actually like become like a creator. But that was all accidentally discovered along the way. It wasn't like I had like ambitions to do that. During the pandemic, the Motley Fool launched this new thing, which they call Motley Fool Live, which is like a 12-hour-a-day live stream like this, where we talk about investing. And they eventually turned it into a very regimented, programmed thing. So they were looking for content. Me and my longtime friend, Brian Stoffel, who I met through the Motley Fool, had this show that we did together. And we thought it was our favorite show ever. What we did was we took a stock that neither of us had any research about. We were starting from zero, and over the course of an hour, we researched it together live, showing people the process that we go through to go from I know nothing about this company to could this be worthy of an investment. Both of us just love educating people, and we thought it was the most valuable like thing that we've done ever for the Fool, because I didn't have that when I was first starting out. I didn't know how to find SEC filings or how to read through them or how to think through numbers or anything like that. So we just loved doing it. over time, the Motley Fool decided that they wanted to reschedule their programming, and that segment got bumped. And we just basically said, well, we like doing this. We will like that this is an excuse to talk to each other. So is it okay if we take this to YouTube? We're going to do the exact same thing, just on YouTube. And they said yes. That's how our YouTube channel got started. And then as that started to grow, sponsors reached out to us and we're like, we can make money from doing this. And again, so we're like, I guess we have to like think through how to split this up and all that kind of stuff. So again, none of this was like thought out ahead of time. It was all like accidentally discovered along the way. Now, about 6 months ago, Brian Stoffel and I launched a cohort-based course where we teach people how to read financial statements. And we've had tremendous fun doing that, and it's been very successful. But we need a third person there to kind of help administer the course. And we were like brainstorming people that we knew that could help us with that. And we also know this guy whose name is Brian Withers, no joke, from the Motley Fool. And both of us have had great relationships with him for years. So we asked him to kind of join us, which he did, and that has grown into more of a partnership thing. So the people that I work with now, I have known for just years, personally and through professionally. So it's not like I have a really thought out process for how to hire people. If I was to start hiring people in the future, that would be something I'd have to put time and effort and energy into doing. But I don't have a lot of insights into do that other than to hire people that I already know well.
That's awesome how those cards just kind of fell in your lap and you just were able to stack them up and build a beautiful tower with them. Because I'll have to thank the Motley Fool and yourself and Brian for doing those videos. Because I remember watching some of your first like videos on the 10-minute where you research a stock, and I feel like I learned so much just from watching those videos. Similar to you, I can relate. I did a valet job and I started listening to podcasts. And one of the first podcasts I listened to was the ChooseFi podcast. I'm sure you're familiar with ChooseFi. You've been on there many times. So I'm just curious. Like,
they published my book.
That really? I did not know that. Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah, Brad Barrett is the one that gave the thumbs up for the book to get published.
Okay, well that's awesome. Well, that's actually how I discovered you, because I saw you on the ChooseFi podcast, and I went to your Twitter, and I was like, okay, wow, this guy's awesome. Let me give him a follow. And ever since it's been history. But I'm curious, how did you gain that connection to ChooseFi? Like, did you already have a connection with him beforehand, maybe through the Motley Fool, like you have with the two other Brians, or how did you kind of get on that platform and just create a strong relationship with them, and you're still doing podcasts to them this year?
Yep. So I met Brad Barrett in 2014. Both at the time I had a blog that I kept, and in the financial space, there's a conference called FinCon, which stands for Financial Conference. Jeez, I'm totally butchering that right now. Anyway, I went to FinCon in 2014, almost on a whim. It was in a convenient spot of the country for me. I had a free place to stay, and I kind of said, what the heck, I'm going to go. I didn't know anybody that was there, like nobody. And I just showed up to this conference, and I am so glad that I went. If you guys, have you ever been to FinCon or even heard to FinCon, I totally recommend going, even if you don't know anybody. I've since been to like 4 or 5 now, and I plan on going to that conference every year for essentially the rest of my life. That's a wonderful place to meet other people, other creators that are in the financial space. And the whole point of the expo is to learn from other creators, connect with like people in like the media, and find ways to actually like earn a living talking about money and finance and helping people. So I met Brad at the time, which was 2014. He had a blog called Richmond Savers at the time, which was like his first blog that we have, and we just hit it off. You know, it's just a casual conversation. Hi, how are you? That kind of thing. And we talked for like maybe like all of like 10, 20 minutes, something like that. And then 4 or 5 years later, he launched ChooseFi, and that podcast like immediately like caught fire and was winning like all these awards and everything like that. And I was like, oh, I should start listening to this. And I realized it was Brad that was doing it. And then they had a podcast come out where they were railing against individual stocks and investing in the stock market, and how everyone's the only way to do it is index funds. And I I have different feelings than they do. So I wrote Brad an email saying, "Hi, Brad, it's Brian. We met so many years ago. You had your podcast about this," and I was like bullet points with like, "Here are some things I don't think you're thinking about." He read it, and to their credit, they immediately said, "We got to have you on to talk about this because you clearly have a different point of view than we do." And that takes total guts to be like, their stance is like index funds are the only thing, and they had me on to kind of push back against that. So all credit in the world to them. And then I just developed a relationship with them. I actually had them. I had a relationship with obviously the Motley Fool, and they are in Richmond, Virginia. The Motley Fool is in Alexandria, Virginia. And I said, "Hey, I'm going down to the Motley Fool. Do you guys want to come up and record a podcast with the Motley Fool, get you guys some more exposure?" They did that, and the relationship just grew from there.
Yeah, I think it's awesome that you kind of just decided to go to the conference, even though you didn't know anyone there, and you just threw yourself into that situation. And out of that, you were able to form a long-lasting relationship with several people. I think that's something that we stress on this podcast a lot, is just taking those chances and taking those leaps of faith. And if you surround yourself, or if you put yourself into a situation like that, then it's going to lead to a better opportunity.
For sure. I think I can't remember who coined the term. I don't know if it's Naval or David Perel, but it's basically increasing your luck surface area, right? You just take lots of chances like that, and eventually, if you make enough of them, something somewhere is going to connect. You don't know where it's going to come from or how, but that's just what happens. Brian Withers, for example, the guy that we are now a partner with over the last 6 months, I met him over a decade ago at a Motley Fool conference, and he was there, I was there. We just started chatting. "Oh, your name's Brian too," and he had never posted to the Motley Fool discussion boards before. He said, "I read them all the time, but I never post." And I was like, "Why don't you do that? Post." And fast forward the clock 7 years, he became a contractor for the Motley Fool through his postings, and he started working on Fool Live that we did, and he's made that his career. So yeah, random encounter, random conference sparked a great relationship.
Yeah, it seems like it. And I think it's also something important to note is how when you contacted the ChooseFi team, I just wanted to emphasize how you didn't agree with them and you still contacted them. I feel like most people look for someone that they agree with, so then you can kind of relate to them more. But I think it speaks to your character and the ChooseFi's team character for having you on and you going on there. And I think there's something so powerful in actually chasing perspectives that don't agree with you, because then you can kind of understand a different perspective and you'll probably learn from that situation in itself. And I think that's just an awesome practice to have that you did.
100%. It's the old strong opinions loosely held, right? That's a really hard thing to do. If you talk to Brad Barrett, he is very strong opinioned about index funds the only way, but he's also a person that just loves to learn. So the fact that he even was willing to talk to me and have me on, again, big kudos to them for doing so.
Yes. And I think one of the best places, like we mentioned already, is Twitter, to kind of find differing views. And I've heard you describe Twitter as more of a micro-blogging site than a social media site. So could you just walk us through why did you say that and what was the reasoning behind it?
Mm-hmm. When people hear social network, the natural thing that they want to do and the natural behavior that they want to model is what they do on Facebook, right? When you go on Facebook, the reason you go on Facebook is to have a digital relationship with people you already know. You've already met these people in real life. You went to school with them. You went to college with them. You used to work with them. You have some sort of relationship with them. And it's a way that you guys can casually keep up with each other's lives by seeing birthdays, major events, when they have kids, when they get married, all that kind of stuff. In that environment, it's very natural to go onto Facebook and say, "Here's what I'm having for dinner. Here's where I'm on vacation," right? "Here's what my kid did." And that is the behavior you should have if you go on Facebook, or even if you go on Instagram just to connect with your friends. Twitter is a completely different animal. You don't go on Twitter to form relationships with people you already know. You go on Twitter to form relationships with complete strangers, people that have no clue who you are. And you have to approach it from that very mindset. If you want to grow on Twitter and you want to connect with other people, strangers don't give a crap where you went to on vacation. They don't care who your favorite sports team is. They don't care what your kids' names are. They don't care about your birthday, right? They don't care about that at all. There's no reason that they should. Do you guys care about a random person in Lincoln, Nebraska, what they're having for dinner, or if it was their birthday? No, they're a stranger. How could you possibly care about that? So the only thing that people on Twitter really care about is what you can do for them. Period. End of story. If you can help them to improve their life in some way by making them laugh, making them informed, making them smarter, making them money, then they'll pay attention to you. Then they'll click that follow button, and then they'll hear what you want to say. But so many people naturally start out on Twitter, myself included, and they think, I'm going to use this the same way I use Facebook, which is a social network. But it's so much more useful to think of Twitter like a blogging platform, because you wouldn't blog about, again, what you had for dinner or where you're going on vacation unless that was your angle.
Yeah, 100%. And I think kind of on that topic of like using Twitter as a way to provide something for someone else. That's obviously what you're doing with your account, and why you're growing so much. And I think I believe it was 2021 where you were doing those graphics every day. You were sending out the graphics, the long-term mindset graphics. And I wanted to know, like, what kind of encouraged you to make that commitment to where you did it every day for, I think it was a year, where you sent out those graphics, and maybe what was something you gained out of that entire year-long commitment?
Yeah, so I saw other people online that were creating these graphics. The person that really influenced me was his name is Jack Butcher. He owns at Visualize Value. And when I first saw one of his graphics get made, I was like, wow, that's incredible. I love that. That is tweeting like I've never seen before. And then I watched a video that Jack did. I think it was on David Perel's YouTube channel, when he kind of like talked through the process that he goes through to make them. And I was like, that is really awesome. I wonder if I could mimic that in some way and learn graphic design, because I was never taught anything about graphic design. And then I thought, okay, I'll make these. I'll pick my favorite investing concepts, my favorite tweets that I've ever done. I'll turn them into these dead simple, stupid graphics, and then I'll share them with the world via email. And each graphic only took me, like 5 minutes or so to make. And again, at the time, I was very much I need to grow an audience to be aware of my book. So I started on Substack. I published these simple graphics, and I decided to challenge myself to make one per day for 365 days. One, to see if I could actually do it, and then two, to really get better at making the graphics, because I thought that would be a useful skill to have. Well, I'm happy to report I succeeded on both accounts. I made it to doing it 365 days in a row, which is one heck of an accomplishment, because sometimes it'd be 11 o'clock at night and I'd be like, crap, I didn't do this today, and I'd force myself to go down to my computer and do it. And more importantly, the way that you get better at anything is you just start doing that thing. If you look at my first graphics I've ever made, they're horrible. Like, they look like they were done by like a 6-year-old with a crayon, right? They're just terrible. But over time, you kind of pick up what works, what doesn't. You get better at using the platform. I use a platform called Figma. You see how other people are doing it, and you're like, oh, that's so cool. I wish I could do that. And then you kind of reverse engineer how to do it. And that skill actually proved to be very useful, because when I started my YouTube channel, having thumbnails are actually a really important thing to making a YouTube well. And I already had these graphic design skills that I could at least port that over, so I could make graphics, I could make thumbnails myself far faster than I could have if I was truly figuring it out from scratch. But the whole point of that exercise was to prove to myself that I could stick to a commitment over the course of a year, which I did, and then to just practice getting better at graphic design.
Well, yeah, I appreciate you going through that commitment, because it definitely has helped me a lot on my investment journey. And I want to kind of dive into like the creativity side of the graphics and how you made them. So I'm curious, like, what is the balance between, like, okay, you have these ideas and you know all these practices that you want to portray on a graphic, and like you need to think of probably new ones if you've already used them, versus, okay, are you recycling old ones and creating a new way to show that same concept? Like, what's the balance there between finding new graphics and creating new ones out of new material versus taking old graphics and creating a new way to express that same concept?
So my initial idea was to create a brand new graphic every day from scratch, which I did for 365 days, 365 days out of the year. I occasionally went back to an old concept that I have and like used updated skills to make it resonate or do it better. But I thought that I thought that you had to be original every single time, right? You had to come up with a brand new idea every single time. And if you were actually repeating yourself, all you're doing is it's cheating, and you're stealing, and like all that kind of stuff. That is a really hard hurdle for some people to get over, myself included. In fact, when I was first starting on Twitter, I took a tweet I did like 4 months before, and I retweeted it, and someone was like, "I read this before. Are you doing your same tweets again?" And I was like super embarrassed at the time, and I was like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I won't ever do this again." And of course, it's like you think that everyone cares what you're doing, but like nobody cares what you're doing. They're just thinking about themselves. And it was only later, after connecting with people like Nick Huber in particular, and he showed me, no, you are supposed to use your same content again and again and again. There's a couple reasons why. First off, if your account is growing and you tweet something out, well, first off, not every follower that you have sees that tweet. Only a small fraction of them do. More importantly, if you're growing your account over time, all those new followers that you have certainly didn't see that tweet that you had previously. And then the final thing I learned is that we need reminders are more helpful than new ideas. Reminders about old ideas that are really good are actually more helpful than new ideas. So my friend Nick Huber, he's Sweaty Startup. He has a couple of tweet storms that have gone viral in the past, and he slightly tweaks them, and then he reposts them every couple of months. And every time he reposts them, they also do extremely well. And again, you're opening that up to a new audience, and you're reminding your audience that it exists. So I actually now repurpose content regularly. I always try and space it out so that it hasn't been shown on any platform over at least a period of 3 months. But I think if you're a content creator, there's absolutely nothing wrong with repurposing your best content.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's kind of what helps you grow across a bunch of different platforms at once, where, you're kind of taking your Twitter threads and then you're immediately using the screenshot carousel method and putting it on LinkedIn. And then even a lot of the Twitter threads you make, when I was reading your book, I was kind of noticing like some of these chapters, like, hey, I've seen him write a thread about this topic before. So kind of transitioning into your book, which I do think is like the ideal resource for a beginner, right? When I was trying to get into investing, I spent so many hours trying to like find different resources to learn this, then learn that. And then, oftentimes I'd have to learn things through experience, and sometimes it'd be through learning it the hard way. And then if I'd had this book where it just kind of has like 60 chapters of everything you need to know to get into investing, that would have been so helpful. But I think one thing I was kind of curious is maybe when you were writing the book and throughout the process and after writing it, was there anything that you kind of discovered and you were like, wow, I did not account for this nor expect this when I started this process?
Yes. So thank you for saying that about the book. I very much wrote it I very much wish that I could have given it to myself 20 years ago when I first started investing. Because like, I've always thought like, what's the first book? If somebody's like, I'm interested in investing, what's the first book that you recommend to them? The classic answers are like The Intelligent Investor by Benjamin Graham, or One Up on Wall Street, or anything by Warren Buffett. All fantastic books, really fantastic books. But I just felt there was no like, here's the first book that just covers the extreme basics, and then it's like a launching off point for like, if you don't care about investing, you now know everything you need to know to like invest in the stock market, like the reason that you should. But if you are interested in investing, now you actually have a foundation to go off to read The Intelligent Investor, or One Up on Wall Street, or a Motley Fool book, etc. When I was writing this book, one of the things that I did is I reached out to my friend group and I said, what questions do you have about investing? Who are your, and how do you invest your money? That is in part how I built my list of questions that I have. But the thing that really surprised me was a lot of my friends actually invest through financial advisors. And that's not something that I've ever done or ever like thought to do. So my next question was there, okay, how did you find this financial advisor? And the answer was, I'm a school teacher. They came to my school one day, or my parents know them, or I don't know. I like read an ad or something like that. Like it was usually from like a friend of a friend that they found out. And I was like, okay, great. How much do they get paid? Blank faces. Nobody could tell me how much their financial advisor got paid. And I was like, doesn't that seem strange? That you hired somebody, you have no idea how much money you're paying them. So my initial plan was to write one chapter about financial and just put some like, things to keep in mind. And after that conversation, I was like, oh my God, I guess there's a lot of need for information about financial advisors. So I ended up taking that into a whole section on there. So that's one thing that I learned through writing the book. And this is why it's so important to get feedback from other people about what they're actually doing. Because I never would have set out to write a whole chapter or a whole section just about financial advisors, but apparently there was a big need for it.
Yeah. So I guess that brings me into a question that's kind of, it doesn't matter super much, but I'm just curious if you could recommend like one part of your book to one person, and they like, if you had to choose one out of all the options where you're like, okay, you can only read this part and this will do you the best. What would you say for them to read?
So the reason that I wrote the book in the first place is because when I was reading books about investing in money, all the books said, the stock market returns 10% per year. You put your money in there, you buy and hold, and you'll do well over time. And they provided that wonderful chart that we've all seen showing the Dow Jones going from lower left to upper right. And like the data is very compelling that, yes, that is the thing to do. The thing that I didn't know, that made no sense to me, that I had never heard explained, is why that happens. Like, why does the market go up over time? Why should you have faith that after the market falls, that it's always going to come back? Yes, historically, it always did come back, but I never understand the mechanism that actually caused the stock market to go up and to rebound. The entire point of my book was to just establish the relationship between the market valuation and corporate profits, and show how those two things are 100% correlated with each other in the long term. So if you can only read one part, I would suggest reading the part about corporate earnings and how that is related to the market. That is the entire point of the book.
Yeah, awesome. I think another section that really stuck out to me was the advice to your younger self and to you. And one of the things I really took away from that, or I had a question about, was you mentioned paralysis analysis, and I never heard that term before, and I was curious what made you think to include that in that section, and could you explain what that is?
Because I suffer from it. Analysis paralysis is when you're the type of person that continuously researches something, but never actually takes action on that because they always feel like they don't have enough information about that. I'm the type of person that suffers from that. Once I start going on something, I typically want to keep going and keep learning without ever actually taking action. If you're the type of person that wants to invest in real estate, for example, you can read all the books in the world about real estate investing and understanding all the different ways that you can do it. You will learn 10 times faster by actually buying a property for the first time, putting a tenant in there, and dealing with real world things, because there's some things you can only learn by experiencing them firsthand. You can't really read them from just a book. And I think there are some people out there that have my personality type that just have that natural inclination to keep on researching, and they just fail to take action. So that's what that was signaling out.
Yeah, that's awesome. Also, I'm curious, like, I think I read this book it's called Economic Narratives. or narrative economics. I'm not familiar. I'm not sure if you're familiar or not, but it basically just emphasizes how impactful narratives are, whether it be in a company or a stock or a business, just anything. And then there's also the fundamental side of like looking at companies and stocks. So I'm curious if you could just like briefly define the two, and then what do you think is more important for an investor to be looking at, the fundamentals of a company or the narrative that's behind the company?
So both are important. Both are important, and I would say which one you focus on really is more about what kind of investor you are, more so than anything else. If you're the type of person that wants to buy low and sell high and trade, narrative is everything. Narrative is the only thing that matters, because narrative is what drives stock prices in the short term. If a stock goes from hated to loved, that stock's going up. If a stock goes from loved to hated, that stock is going down. And narratives can change drastically based on new information or macro news or all kinds of factors that have nothing to do with the company itself. That is something that I have no ability to do and no real interest in doing, but I do realize that it has a huge impact on short-term price movements. Conversely, fundamentals, so what a business is actually producing in terms of revenue, in terms of margins, in terms of profits, what it actually does with those, fundamentals have a massive impact on the value of a company in the long term, but it has almost no impact on the value of a company in the short term. In the short term, it's narrative drives everything. In the long term, fundamentals drive everything. If you're going to invest the way I do, which is I look for high quality companies that I think can grow for a long period of time, I buy those companies and then I sit through all the roller coaster ride, the ups and the downs, all in an effort to compound the money I put in there at a above average rate for as long as possible. If you're going to invest that way, you need to understand both. You need to understand how narrative drives price and the fundamentals. I personally overemphasize the fundamentals because I believe that the fundamentals will eventually win out in the long term. But there's no doubt that investors should pay attention to both.
Yeah, I'm curious. Now that you've kind of gotten through the process of writing this book and you kind of know what it was like and if like whether it was worth it or not, which I'm sure it was. Are you planning on writing another book? You have this one that covers the extreme basics. Maybe you could write one about something more in depth or how to research a company. Is that in your future plans?
Potentially, but I remember one of my favorite books in the last couple of years is A Simple Path to Wealth by J.L. Collins. And when that book was being published, what it essentially was his blog turned into book form. So he had his blog all set up and all these things were written out, and he basically formatted them for a book and then published it. And I vividly remember when his book came out, he came on a podcast and he was like, I can't believe how hard it is to write a book. And I remember thinking at the time, what are you talking about? You just like copied and pasted from like your blog that already existed. Like, what is this like huge hassle that you are talking about? Only after I actually wrote a book did I realize exactly what he was talking about. Writing a book is an extremely painful process, especially if you're someone that is not a natural writer, such as me. I'm the type of person that's my mind is built for math and logic. It is not built for language and English. Did great on math part of SATs, did terrible on the English part of my SATs. So nowhere in a million years would I have thought that in the future I would be an author or I would write a book. The reason I wrote this book is because I saw absolutely nothing like it in the marketplace. And I had thought for years before I wrote this thing, why isn't there a book that just explains the basics in like a dead simple way and then gets out of there? Again, I didn't have a really great answer to what's the first book about investing that you recommend to somebody. And I thought, wow, somebody should write that. It would be great. I would love to recommend it. And then eventually, after talking to enough people, I was like, oh, I guess I'm supposed to be the one that actually writes the book. It was very painful to write a book from start to finish. I learned a ton. I'm very happy I went through that entire process. But as of right now, I have no plans to write a second book. if I did find something in the marketplace and I was like, why has nobody written a book about this topic? And I was really passionate about it, perhaps I'll bash my head into a brick wall again and write a second book. But I have no plans to do so right now.
Yeah, I can't imagine how stressful that is. And on the topic of the book you mentioned, I think Morgan Housel, when he wrote The Psychology of Money, that was actually based off of one of his blog posts where he had written out the 20 different principles, and he turned that into a book as well, which is funny.
Yes, it was essentially all of the content that he created over for the Motley Fool and the Collaborative Fund, his kind of like best pieces put into a book form, and that has worked out spectacularly well for him. So yes, so even if the content already exists, let me assure you, turning it into an actual book is still very painful.
Yes, well, we appreciate like all the resources that you've put out in the book. All your Twitter stuff. And I'm kind of curious, like, what kind of motivates you to kind of like switch into that mindset of like, okay, let me share everything I know with the world and try to better other people in their life, compared to just like, okay, doing your own research, keeping everything in your Google Docs, not really sharing it with the world. What motivates you like internally to kind of share all this knowledge and wealth of information with people all over the world?
Some people just, I'm the type of person that just naturally gets a tremendous amount of pleasure having somebody else learn something that I myself learned the hard way. So I really just get enjoyment out of teaching other people things that I myself was not taught. I think that's just core to my personality. In another life, I could have been perhaps a college professor or a teacher of some kind. In fact, later this week, I'm visiting my children's elementary school because I do a stock picking contest with them, surely for fun. I've done this for years with them. So I volunteer to like teach at my kids' elementary school simply because I like to do it, and I make it super fun. And the kids' eyes like light up when they learn that they can become an owner of YouTube, or they can become an owner of the company that makes Xbox and that kind of thing. And that's the kind of thing that I was just not taught as a kid myself. So I'm the type of person that just gets a tremendous amount of joy out of seeing other people learn things.
Well, yeah, thank you. I can't imagine what it would have been like if I was in elementary school and you were coming with all your knowledge and teaching me about the stock market and money and finances. I feel like I would have been in a lot better place than I was today, even though I'm still got an early start, but it still is a fascinating thing that would be something that you do.
Totally. Plus I call it how your favorite things can make you rich, and it's got lots of fun graphics in there, and we talk about like Fortnite and YouTube versus Google. Like I see these kids' faces as I'm talking about that. It like is by far like I've been told many times by their parents that it's their favorite thing that they kids do in school.
Awesome. Well, I guess as we kind of wrap up here, it's kind of surreal, and we really thank you for coming on. Like I said, I think I followed you for 3 years, and the fact that now we're having a conversation with you is awesome. But we kind of ask all of our guests one final question, and that is, what is one goal you have in your career or personal life, and what steps are you taking to achieve that goal?
I used to be someone that was really motivated by goals. And I had a goal to become financially independent, for example. I've since become a much bigger believer in missions and systems. So I used to think that mission statements were just corporate nonsense, something that you put on our About Us page because like you had to for PR reasons. Slowly over years, thanks in large part to Brian Stoffel, I've since realized that mission statements can actually be one of the most powerful tools that people have in their life for decision making, and they're really hard to craft. And mine has changed a little bit over the last couple of years. But my mission statement is to demystify finance, and I am the type of person that just gets tremendous personal satisfaction out of taking complex financial things and explaining them to people in a way that they can understand. So I'm more focused on executing against that mission in whatever way that I can, as opposed to achieving some particular goal. And I'm starting to set up my life that I have systems in place that allow me to continuously do that, as opposed to saying, okay, goal achieved.
Right. Well, it was our greatest pleasure celebrating our 1 year episode with you. And before you go, we're going to link your website. We're going to link your Twitter account. You even have podcasts of like your YouTube audios. We'll link that too. Is there anything else you just want to leave with the audience as far as like resources? I mean, if you literally like go on Spotify or Apple Podcasts and you just type in Brian Feroldi, there's a number of podcasts out there for anyone listening that wants to listen to more knowledge from you. So I highly recommend everyone go doing that because he's been on a number of great podcasts out there. But is there anything else that you want to just leave with the audience before you go?
Yeah, I would just say that one of my favorite things that we do every week is we, me and my two Brians have a newsletter that we created called Long-Term Mindset, and in there we share one investing lesson that we've learned the hard way over the years. We share resources to timeless content that we find. It could be YouTube videos, it could be articles, could be blog posts, could be books, could be quotes, etc. And we share that once a week. So if that interests you, you can check that out on my website, which is brianferoldi.com.
Thank you for sharing that. I forgot to mention that. Thank you so much for your time, Brian. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.